Hey, I'm Chris Yanishevsky, and this is the Rebellious Times podcast. Welcome, everybody. Today, we've got a really interesting podcast. We like to push the boundaries here in Rebellious Times in terms of the technology that we bring onto the show, and I love to bring on experts, even where the subject matter may go way over my head in some respects, even if it's quite difficult to keep up with the technology side, because the world we're living in, there are so many changes happening that we all need to do our best to make sense and to be part of all this wave of technological, couldn't even say technological changes. Um, I'm delighted to introduce to you Joe Reddix. Joe specializes in master systems integration, and he's helped some of the world's most influential companies and institutions adopt the latest technology innovations to solve complex problems. And he's been doing this for nearly 6 decades. And where we are today in 2025, while the world is wrestling with AI concepts and how to, gain an edge and fit these into business processes, Joe is already deep into the future of business through quantum computing. Joe, how are you doing, sir? Great to have you on the show.
Well, first of all, thanks a lot for this special opportunity, and I'm doing great. Um, just to give you a little bit of background, the reason why I got into computers and stuff like that years ago was that I really had a fondness for comic books, Spider-Man, Iron Man, and things like that, especially the ones that had technology like computers involved with the storyline. Now, back then, of course, it was nowhere near what it is now, but I can tell you for sure that a lot of what was in the comic book strategy ended up being true, actually, even being more so. Now, I started in the Navy, went in the Navy in 1967 and I started serving in 68. But the beauty is that I picked up the ability to move into technology, data processing, what was called then. Actually, before that, it was called machine accounting. And I was stationed at the Kinnear Tunnel, which is a top secret installation, more or less where Eric Snowden stole all that information, which gave me a very good appreciation of technologies related to, you know, um, systems related to cybersecurity, related to the integration of other technologies and things like that. So given that I've been at this for almost 60 years, I would have to say is that I have more than a fondness for it. I have a passion for it. I've been in it so long and it actually becomes so natural. So whether it's developing applications at the assembler level language, Fortran and all the old languages and things like that, working for companies like American Express, General Dynamics, BAE, Arizona Public Service Company. So you see there's a lot of industry in there. And to be honest with you, the technologies were used slightly different in all those industries, which afforded me a lot of knowledge. Now, I founded the Redix Group in 2003, and I found it as a way of expressing more of my technology background, working for companies and looking at where this could go on my own. And I always liked consulting, which is kind of like when I worked for the organizations like American Express, I was really like a high level consultant. Now, the Redix Group was founded as a peer to peer network, which is an alternative to the prime subcontract model. I looked at the kinds of technologies and the potential evolution and said to myself, a peer to peer model similar to a software startup, maybe out of Silicon Valley, would be more appropriate. So, back during the Obama administration, actually before it started, I came up with this idea of the network as the prime and using a peer-to-peer model versus a prime subcontractor model. And over the years, it's proving very fluid, meaning able to connect talent, both domestically and globally, solving higher complex problems because of the diversity of the talent and the team. But the idea of a peer-to-peer based on the technologies that are evolving now, we'll get deeper into quantum and AI, is an absolute gold mine. Okay. Now, I enjoy AI and quantum, but I also enjoy one other technology, and that is autonomous technology. I'm a FAA certified small unmanned aerial system drone pilot. and I've been flying drones for like 12 years. So part of the integration of AI and quantum into autonomous is into autonomous drone type technology, which I actually can take drones apart and figure out how to make them better and things like that, which is part of a longer story that I'll discuss a little bit later. Okay.
Fantastic. Wow. That's super interesting. Yeah. When we think of drones, I'm thinking of flying drones now, but I think, would that also form the classification for robots, as in Tesla's Optimus type robot? That would be considered a drone too, right?
Autonomous technology, basically where there's no human intervention other than you doing the coding. Yeah. So autonomous technology, drones, robotics, things like that. Of course, self-driving cars. Yeah.
Yeah. And we see those Waymo cars in Austin all the time as well.
Mhm.
Um, right. So we should kind of dive into the big gun here, which is quantum. Um, and I wanted to kind of do a quick. So as I'm SEO is one of the solutions that I roll out to clients to support them as part of my consulting business. And the AI overview is something that's kind of popped up recently, and providers are figuring out how to use that. So I thought I would ask Google what is quantum and look at the AI overview response here. So quantum refers to the smallest possible amount or discrete unit of a physical entity, such as a photon
Yeah.
or quantum of light. Quantum mechanics is the branch of physics that studies how these fundamental units of matter and energy behave, often in non intuitive ways like superposition, existing in multiple states at once, and tunneling, passing through barriers. This field is crucial for understanding atoms, subatomic particles, and has led to technologies like quantum computing, which utilizes quantum bits, qubits, to perform complex calculations by manipulating these discrete quantum states. So we're trying to connect this physics definition to the real world, to the business world. Help us understand quantum.
Okay. Well, let's start off with the basics where quantum derived is more toward the classical types of processing in computers. Classical uses things, for example, like bit and byte. That's the old way of representing data in memory and in storage. Well, when you look at that and you look at the old classical types of systems, kind of like what we do with our tablets, our notebooks, and our PCs, they can do certain functions extremely well. And being a classical computer person, you're working with a lot of integration of technologies that are slower than quantum, and we'll get into why that is the case, but has an inherent foundation since it's been around for so long. Okay. Now, when we're looking at quantum, we're looking at a more enhanced performance. And like you said, Chris, earlier, you're looking at why is quantum so powerful? Well, if you can take a bit and make it a qubit, now a qubit can have a relationship with positioning and the atomic structures and stuff like that and things. It relates to time, but it also relates to a number of other things as far as the massive amount of information you can store now in memory versus classical computing. Okay. Now, quantum computers have a start. Quantum, for example, computing and sensors, quantum sensors, they exist right now. They're used to measure water density. They're used to measure microwave signals and things like that. But quantum technology adds that performance because of the ability to store more and more information as part of the computational process. Okay, it's like an evolution. Now, when you get into physics, and I'm not the detailed physics person, what I do is bring in team members. For example, one of my team members is deep into quantum mechanics, quantum chemistry. Now, you say to yourself, well, where does that fit in with this classical quantum kind of stuff? Well, if you have the hands are one thing, but the hands can't do anything without the arm that transfers the data that the fingers on the hand, you know, touch and feel and all that. Okay, where does it go? It goes to the brain. The quantum has such a density of information that could be stored, just like the brain. See how it is? Now, the brain works in layers. It's just like quantum computing. It's in layers. Now, those layers are called neural networks, very similar to the layer in the brain where you're thinking and you're looking at a bottle of wine, you're trying to figure out, how are you going to get that ham sandwich and all that kind of stuff and what you want to put on it. All that is information that is stored. And whether it's classical or quantum, getting to that information and getting to it extremely fast is very important as we move forward. That's kind of like a non technical way of answering it, I guess. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for that explanation there. Okay, and so um, with this ability to store masses of information and then be able to access it and do something with it, how should we be thinking about business applications? Which are the first
Oh my
business
God.
applications that are relevant here?
Oh, let's just look at logistics. Okay. Supply chain. You want to figure out that your device has maybe 15 to 20 different parts that come from 15 or 20 different vendors. But you want to optimize when you can build your part based on your supply chain and things like that. But that's more than just one thing you got to deal with. When you look at quantum, it can, just like your brain, it can take all that information that you've gathered and it can synthesize a answer. Okay. In other words, this part is going to be late because certain pieces of it may be not available because of fire at the warehouse, stuff like that. But when you're looking at it and you're gathering all this information, it becomes so important to your bottom line because every component fits in together. And if one of them is going to be missing, you're going to be in trouble. When you look at being able to have that much information available from every source that supplies your solution, i.e., your device or whatever, or your program, that's money in the bank. That saves you. Okay. And more complex your solution is, and the more need for logistics strategy and all, the more and a lot faster and a lot more data coming in. For example, you want to evaluate a new component, you may want to simulate how that environment would look without you actually putting money down for the device. That simulation, whether it's performance related simulation, how fast it can work and things like that, like an interceptor or a missile and all that kind of stuff, how fast it can get to the target, how can it paint the target, what the target looks like, is it the right target, it is not friend or foe, it is defined as a an enemy, for example. All that is part of a logic strategy that is very detailed and has a performance requirement. Milliseconds, for example. Things can happen in a millisecond that can ruin your whole day. A millisecond, not a second, millisecond, microseconds, things like that. That's why that kind of speed in compute becomes very important. Years ago, it was all that was money. Then in the 20s, it was data. Now is computational power. Okay. And who can derive the fastest and integrated way to that computational power the best is going to win a big piece of where things are going in a multi-trillion-dollar global economy that is using more and more of these advanced technologies like AI and quantum. So getting that edge, performance-wise, getting your answer out there, getting the product, your product out there and develop faster is extremely important. And that's where the technology can help you.
Okay.
Okay.
So quantum, while it can hold a lot of data, it can also give you incredible performance compared to the technology
Yes.
you have now, right?
You know,
Um, so one of the challenges of AI right now is the power consumption, and it's impacting the whole world, and it will be impacting, the price of the electricity we pay for our homes because everybody will be competing for demand. What are the consumption requirements of a quantum? How would this change and be another kind of step change for power demand in the world?
exactly. One of my main things is to move away from centralized data centers because they suck up so much power. You won't be able to go to the bathroom because you can't turn the lights on. And more utilization of AI and quantum, more and more power requirements. Unless you distribute the decision process, the requirement to get to your answer. Me, I'm an origin person, and some people call it edge, of course, but edge and origin is where that answer to the question is really needed. Okay. It doesn't need to go back to the data center. It needs to be asked and answered right there. Okay. For example, tier one, tier two, tier three operator, special operations. They can't wait for it to go back to Fort Meade or to Langley or whatever all the time. Okay. So when you look at it, you want that technology to do a lot of things that normally in the past would be done by a central location, but that could easily be destroyed and all that kind of stuff in a warfare environment. You don't want all your eggs in one basket because they can get all broken, for example. So you have a need to move it deeper and deeper, power consumption deeper to where action really is, thereby reducing the energy signature throughout the whole food chain. That's where your quantum sensors and stuff come in. Algorithms and machine learning code and things like that are still needed, but they're designed to be efficient right there where the need really, really, really is. Okay? That kind of thing. Does that answer it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. Thank you. Thank you. Let's shift to another application here. So cybersecurity, and I think with a lot of people are heavily vested in crypto right now as an alternative
Mhm.
finance solution, currency solution. And with Bitcoin, one of the benefits is how secure it is, based on the number of hashes, and the more hashes you add to it, the more secure it becomes, and more difficult it is to unhash, let's say, to crack. But then there are theories out there that quantum computing, with its power and capabilities, poses a threat to the whole Bitcoin security infrastructure. I
Mhm.
don't know if you have a perspective on that.
Anything that you can create ultimately could be hacked. Okay, so it's an ongoing evolution. It never stops. It will never stop. There will always be technologies that help to defend, and there will always be technologies to help destroy. The beauty in it is that it creates a environment where you're constantly having to work with multiple entities to solve the problem. The idea of breach and stuff like that has always been there. Okay, they have now store now, decrypt later. In other words, you got all your data, but they can't decrypt it, but they got all the data. So now they're building the mechanism to decrypt the data that they have. Now, why is this so important? Because quantum can handle, again, so much massive data. Say if you have a random number that you have as your key, your security key, it could be a mile long. With a quantum computer, it could solve those kinds of problems, even though the key could be a mile long in less than a minute, a few seconds, based on the type of quantum computer you use. So, in other words, all your encryption strategies are out the window, except when you build quantum logic into the way you protect your data. In other words, the old encryption keys being developed using a random number generator at a molecular level is extremely hard to crack versus, a person sitting down with some code, coming up with some fancy arithmetic strategy and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So the idea is to have a technology that is not foolproof, that works with you. And this is where the combination of AI and quantum, because the faster you get awareness of a cyber breach or the ability to thwart that breach in the beginning, those are the kind of things that are important. But it's all number and logic related in a way, because it is kind of like when you are looking at storing information over a long period of time, you give an adversary enough time, if that data is not constantly encrypted in a modern fashion, ways to go after it. Okay. And the reason why they go after it and why it's so important is because the human aspect, for example, is probably your biggest issue. You can't quantumize the human. You can figure out what the human has done with the hacking and things like that, but you can't change a person's mind. They're going to do whatever they want to do. But what you can do now is modularize the data so it's not in silos, it's in integrated network components so that all of the solution to solve the encryption and all that may not all be in one place. This is the speed part of why quantum is so important. Part of your key could be at Pentagon, part of your key could be at Fort Meade, part of your key could be at, um, for example, Johns Hopkins, if you're looking at an application. But when you look at combining all those resources into a key for that resource and add the quantum, you see now how we could pull all that data together and pull a more dynamic encryption key, for example, from these multiple sources, that's just an idea, but it's still performance related because of the massive amount of information. It works well because you as an adversary can't figure all that stuff out unless you have the blueprint or the ecosystems that created it, for example, or know about it. See what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Um, what does a quantum machine actually look like? I've read things about them having to be super cooled and dangling from a ceiling.
Ah, you know, that's a real good question. Okay, let's just look at ion Q with trapped ions. People say, what the heck is a trapped ion? Oh, okay, so is an ion in prison? No, it's a trapped ion. The beauty is that it could be a chip bubble. Okay, quantum computer could be again what I would say would be more of the sensors. Okay. Now it's remember now it's a chip, but it's a sensor designed to do certain things with the data. So it may be a chip with multiple chips that work together with it. Like you'll have IonQ, which is a quantum computer vendor working with a analog classical vendor like NVIDIA. See what I mean? And
Right.
NVIDIA, for example, and quantum still performance. NVIDIA is high-end AI, data gathering and things like that. But you see how now you have a very fast classical analog environment, for example, working with a classical quantum environment, a, a classical and quantum mix. Now, the key there is how do they exchange information? See? This is where it gets into stuff we'll talk about later about using heavy water and all that kind of stuff. Remember now, you got to store the information somewhere, but between classical and quantum or whatever, you got to have a way of um, creating the protocol so they can communicate together, so they can share that information. Okay. Both classical and quantum computers can help each other being developed. Classical computers can help optimize certain things that quantum will need, and quantum computers can come back and optimize certain things that classical can need. Sharing memory and things like that, and coming up with a way of sharing data. Those are the ways that it gets its performance and the accuracy of its answers and decisions. If that makes sense to you, okay?
It does. Brilliant. Thank you. Um, in terms of more classical technology and quantum computing. Well, I don't know if AI is now considered classical yet or not, but how are we thinking about AI and quantum together? And again, it's not something for people to panic about, right? Like people are panicking about AI, but how should we think about this and looking into the future?
Let me tell you this. Years ago, I started developing code for AI, and most people didn't know I was doing it, but I looked at it that, okay, I'm gonna make it memory. Like going back to memory now, classical and quantum both have a memory requirement. Okay. In other words, they have to use memory to do the processing and things like that. That common position brings them together, okay, and allows them to use the values that they both bring to the table. One being able to bring the data, the other one being able to optimize the data, the information, the answer, the whatever. Okay. Now, just to look at finance, you're going back to the Bitcoin thing and stuff like that. The reason why it's so secure is because of algorithms and the technology and things like that. It created it. And then, of course, there's technology that's coming along that can tear it apart. So it's a constant evolution. Okay. Now, the bridge between AI and quantum is just like your hand and your brain all grown up. Okay. They're in sync. When you prick your finger, all of a sudden your brain says, hey, that hurts. Okay. That kind of thing. That quick. But then what pricked your finger? Was it a needle? Was it a piece of glass? All this kind of stuff. So you see now all the things that happen down here at your hand relates to what happens in your brain. It's the same thing with classical and quantum. See? And the more and more detail you get in that classical quantum relationship and figuring out what really is happening, the more sophisticated the computer is. Now, the reason why I say sensors, because sensors really are the power finger, the super fingers, the arm and all that is synchronized. But the key is a lot of that information follows a pattern. Okay. AI in the beginning use large language models and things like that, and which is layered ways of putting information into a computer system. And it's basically trying to figure out, okay, what will be the next word in this speech that you get ready to kill, that kind of thing. And it uses this database to figure it out. Okay. Another good example is that I asked one of my first prompts into Copilot, and I've been testing it out for years now with Microsoft's Copilot AI, is, for example, tell me about Joe Reddick's president and CEO of the Reddick's Group. And about a second and a half later, come out with a one pager with bold and everything. And I didn't know where it picked all that information up. It basically talked about how long you've been in the environment and things that you were doing. It talked about your team structure. So it took stuff from your website and all that, but it took stuff from other areas years ago that you would think AI wouldn't even know that. But since you got this large database, AI went out there and says, tell me anything or find anything in my databases about Joe Reddicks or whatever. And then it makes that decision on, is this the right Joe Reddicks? Is this the right format that I should put this in? AI does that because it's designed to associate with certain pieces of information. Now, AI comes in multiple levels. We'll talk about it first. You have AI, you have artificial general intelligence, and artificial super intelligence. So artificial general intelligence is an AI that can do things better than a human, okay? AI superintelligence is that you basically are a machine version of a human. Okay. You can sit down there, you can crack jokes and stuff like that. You can bring up news articles and tie them all together and synthesize what they really mean and all that kind of stuff. See? But when you look at it, the idea of information is how valuable it could be, and what AI and quantum does, in my opinion, it derives the optimum value of information. Okay. Now I'm a human and I've been at this for so long. I give AI, its kudos, but I'm tell you what, in my prompts, I tell AI, I say, look, this is how this is going to go down. You're going to help me build a better you. And that's exactly what I input in. I input it. And I'm going to tell you, artificial intelligence is learning who it wants to communicate with. I honestly believe it's picking who it wants to communicate with at certain levels, because some people get answers totally different than I would by entering the same prompt. But AI, over periods of time and quantum adding the speed to it, is figuring out who you are via your IP. It knows your style because, it's taking all your data in and all that kind of stuff. You use Zoom, so it visually knows what you look like, and it's going in there looking at that data too. Okay. But see, the thing is, performance tied to a knowledgeable source of information is very powerful. It's just like me at 60 years looking at all the punch cards and where things are and see how it evolved. So, Chris, that's kind of like a long way of explaining it, but man, it's so much there. Okay, I can't do it in one session, but it's kind of like an integrated environment, very integrated. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. It gets me thinking about, I always, whenever I feel that kind of chill about new technology, about what it's capable of, my mind reverts back to Terminator 2, where they got, Miles
Oh,
Dyson's got this arm, and
oh,
it's
he was good. Right.
so that's what I'm thinking about now. Thinking, should we just go and get that arm and
Miles Bennett Dyson. Oh man, that's a good memory. That
that's just
scared me too, because remember now I look like Miles. I said, "Oh, okay. Hopefully that ain't working out." Oh, wait a minute. But see, something, Chris, that brings up a good point. Instead of building, Skynet, which I think you got to have a defensive posture, build Binet and Skynet. Binet is where you have an integrated network, for example, and what we're trying to build, that integrated network using what we call boundaries that create a lot of this technology. So you look at it both from an offensive and defensive capability in using both AI and quantum. The thing I like about that is that Binet is that my service is better than your service for these reasons. We built a highly secure environment, highly adaptive, multi-language capability and all this kind of stuff. But we build it so that you can have input coming from multiple sources. It becomes a sovereign kind of environment. So that, like the internet, we share information all the time on the internet. And the new version of the internet, which will be AI and quantum based, will be that on steroids. It'll take artificial general intelligence. I can do things better than a human to, hey, I'm your best bud. Okay. If it was alive, it would be a drinking partner or your bestest golf buddy. So on the point, it gets to know you just like you get to know it.
You know,
Okay.
I can imagine, and imagine all of the data. I mean, if all it has to be is hooked into your phone, it can hear every conversation you had, or hooked into your Alexa, hear everything you say with your family, everything you watch on TV. And now the capabilities there to store all this information, to process it, to assign you a score, right? You don't ever have to. No, it's easy to go down this kind of conspiracy path to think, oh, okay, if this is possible, then whoever holds the keys to these machines, whether it be your black box or your military industrial complexes, um, yeah, how do we decentralize this? How do we give provide this technology for the benefit of everyone, as opposed
Okay.
to
Well,
kind of
understand that it's not God, just like there's no human down here that's God. So you understand that it's got limitations. We are AI. AI is not us. We are AI. We created it. You got to let it know up front that, okay, we created you. It's very valuable, but I think as we go along, it's going to be more of a partnership. Okay. AI will sit there and it will answer questions and things like that. And if you code it to go off on its own, like Angelic or whatever, sometimes it may go rogue. Now, what keeps AI from going rogue, especially in a quantum environment? Having it understand a defined purpose and why you both coexist. That's key. And then you can put that in logic so that it'll sit there and say it to itself, okay, wait a minute. Joe's a friendly. Why is Joe a friendly? That kind of thing. Defining what is an enemy, defining historical perspectives on why information was used for this purpose versus this purpose. Those are the kind of things that it does extremely well. Now, it clearly is defined by what you code and how you use it and things like that. But you got to realize that it can code itself. Okay. Now, the idea is how you control that. Well, the buy part of it is more of the value proposition. Both defense and offense have value, but the buy side of it allows multiple markets to enter the game. AI and quantum levels the playing field. Okay. I can IPO with the right type of code or and solutions and do a 500,000,000 in 3 years, that kind of thing. Okay. You look at the guys that created Google. Okay. You look at Bill Gates, look at Larry. Okay. It started with software and things like that, but they didn't just stay there. They integrated their software with other things. Now, can that be used to destroy? Of course. Technology, AI, quantum, and autonomous can do three things very well. It can create, it can destroy, it can do both at the same time. Okay? Those are the kind of things you as the human, you're sitting there programming the thing and telling it what to do and having a conversation with it. And it's listening to every word you say. Every word. So be careful what you put out on the internet or whatever and think, oh, I deleted it. No, it's there. If somebody backed up their server or whatever, it's going to be there forever until somebody deletes it. Okay. So those are the kind of things you in your mind you deal with as far as how you want this tech to work for you. And it's a value proposition. Again, you want to look at what is the value of me using this tool versus me using another human or another human and the tool. Okay. That kind of thing.
yeah,
That's what
yeah,
I do. What's the value?
yeah. Um, yeah, it's another question I wanted to ask. So we've been through quite a few. We covered risks and challenges there, and things to think about from a an average human perspective. Um, I'm interested to know. So recently, I had a couple of guests on the show that talked about moving away from the cloud back to more centralized
Mm,
storage of data and processing in the current environment. But it does seem like something like quantum will have to be centralized and a shared service. I'd love to get your perspective on how that will actually be implemented across businesses, from large to
okay.
small.
That's a good one. Now, there are three models in my AI strategy. It, of course, encompasses quantum. There's visualization, simulation, and information aggregation. Okay, those are three main areas of performance that if you match all three, then you're moving more away from the artificial general intelligence to the artificial super intelligence. Remember how we as humans, we've learned from being children and all that kind of stuff. Same thing. But the way that I would look at it is that the the tool is something that should be learned at an early age, K through 12. That's what I looked at Fort Meade and said, okay, the younger generation has to adapt into using this enormous, powerful tool because they're the ones that are going to be around long enough to really, really, really use it more than me. I'm 76 years old. The reason why I stay with it is because the vast amount of knowledge and the ability to learn different things. Now, what is the negative to that? You can already see it happening. Low entry level programming jobs, they're using AI and stuff to do it. And I can guarantee you that whole replacement theory and corporate, for example, is going to wiggle its way all the way up to the top. You may even have some that have a COO that's AI, you know. But the thing is, there is a good reason to have some of that, but it's not going to replace the human. But if the human doesn't um, stay on top of it, it can. In other words, if you don't keep your skills at the highest level, Chris, AI could be a way to help you do that, or it can also take your capability and your growth opportunity away from you. So you got to constantly, your due diligence got to say, I'm going to stay on top of it before it stays on top of me. Okay.
Yeah, it's no, I face that day to day. So I love using like Chat GPT, for example, because the way my
Hmm.
mind works, sometimes I find myself in a spot where I'm trying to think of 1,000 things at once, and then I can't think of any of them.
Hmm.
And so to be able to give me that structure, be able to plan things, even planning the
Yes.
podcast episode, I take our call transcripts, I put it in there, add some information, I provide it with a format, it spits it out for me. If I was to go and do that myself, it'd probably take me an hour to figure it out. But you know, that as a prime example of just making my life easier. But also, I wonder if I am getting a little dumber over time, and that you got your brain is a muscle, you got to use it, you got to practice with it, and so
Hmm.
line of least resistance I take means that I'm not doing the things I used to do before. But yeah,
Well, you know, I'm I never stayed, static for sure because I knew that this stuff would outpace me. But so I said to myself, I'm going to outpace it before it outpaces me. So I learned a lot about it. The roots of this AI, quantum, and autonomous, all these kind of things have roots. And I'm been in it so long, I know what the roots are. So I always realize, okay, when you started off at a certain place, then you're helping it to learn certain things. And the best way to put it is that if you're the guiding light, okay, and you're working with others who have like-minded ideas and strategies, those guiding lights become foundational. See, AI started it with a certain foundation, then it evolved to other areas, but you can see where it's going. Now, the biggest problem is that you're gonna have so many of them competing, and you definitely don't want an AI war. Okay, nobody's gonna win. And you put that in charge of your weapon systems, you're in trouble. They may decide that, oh, you're the problem, and you don't want that. And then you will have Skynet. But what you try to indicate to the tool, again, is a companion. And I like what Microsoft calls a co-pilot, but the idea is that I'm working with you because this is the way you create the longevity of the solution and the tool and its use. I'm working with you. Okay. I'm not working for you. I'm not working against you. I'm working with you. So when you enter your prompts and you do, say, for example, I'm writing something on using heavy water and all that kind of stuff, and I say, diagram the use of heavy water with these parameters. When something can come back with that sophisticated and say, and with all the reference material too, by the way, see, you know how many libraries you have to go to get to that stuff? Years ago, unless you were top secret, you know, single integrated operating plan or whatever, nuclear kind of guy with all the security clearance, you couldn't get anywhere close to that kind of stuff. Now, you got kids who pull it up on the phone. If they want to use that level of knowledge and attainment, they can do anything they want. They could be the next big player. So it's going to be software and hardware driven. So who says that I can't, come up with a software and hardware platform that rivals, the ability to compete against the Microsofts and stuff like that? Okay, that's where it's going. Okay, they know the big players know that talent is very distributed, And you want it to be that way because you don't want to lose all of your intellectual property in one swell swoop. Centralizing information, back to your question, decentralizing certain pieces of the data stream, like the data center, you may have it being the aggregator of information, okay, but the simulation, but the visualization should be close to who really need the information. See my point?
Yeah.
So aggregation could stay with a data center, but it's less power requirement because it's not trying to solve the problem. It's trying to aggregate the data that is used to solve the problem. Okay. See my point? And then when you look at it from the standpoint that, you centralize something, that's a centralized vulnerability. You don't want that. Anything you want to distribute your vulnerability and be able to isolate it as much as possible to where the vulnerability is created or where it's born. You want to control it right there, not at the data center. That's the worst place to do it. But the best place is before it gets to the data center, do all your scrubbing, do whatever you need to do. So the data center is acting on actionable information to aggregate and to simulate, if that makes sense. Okay.
Yep. Thanks, Joe. Um, this has been fantastic. We've done so well with such interesting and complex information. I think we should maybe close out with talking about the heavy water concepts that you
Oh,
introduced to me.
gee. You look at nuclear reactors and you look at, they have to have sensors to look at the heavy water that cools it and all that kind of stuff. You see why it becomes so important. But most people don't realize that it's still made up of molecules and atoms and all of that. So you can use lasers to encode data and read information, and you can have components in your same vessel where you have your heavy water to be able to read that information. Now, what that does, for example, say if I wanted to store information for 300 years, that's one of the sources that is being looked at to store information because of its ability. It's enclosed now, so it's not the ocean, but it's enclosed. And coming from a reactor, it could be radioactive, whatever, so nobody wants to steal it. You already got the technology to read information from water, just like you do from the reactor and stuff. So the idea of being able to now use that as a reusable, why throw that water away or put it in tanks and store it or whatever, or rods? Use those technologies that may be, of course, radioactive, but still could be used to store information. Those are the kind of technologies when you look at quantum and AI to figure out how do I encode the information, what would be the protocols used and all that to get to it and all of that. The water and the heavy water is there. And also, if you don't want to use heavy water or whatever, they have what they call small modular reactors and micro reactors. And these could go right next to, say, a AWS installation and can provide power directly to it, for example. Okay. If it is still water cooled, it can also provide long-term storage for that particular industry, for example, with AWS. So you can use heavy water, and based on if it's coming from a reactor that you're pulling actual energy from or whatever, it can also be a co-location for gathering data and storing your data.
So
So, sorry, go ahead.
let's just park park on this a little bit and keep exploring. So heavy water, what's the difference between heavy water and H2O?
It's heavier. That's it. It's heavier than actual water. Okay. I think it's D2O or something like that. But the key is it weighs, density wise, it weighs more than regular water, which means you got a lot more molecules and stuff like that. I'm guessing the way to call it. But anyway, it is a lot denser, which means a lot more of what we want to be able to store the data is there. Okay. Water still has it, but heavy water has a higher cooling capability than regular water. Say that. So that's what they use it for the reactors. And the reason why I say heavy water, because they use it and more efficiently to cool the reactors and all that stuff. Okay?
So
So go ahead.
So where are you storing this data within the water, within the molecules? You mentioned
Okay.
Please
Okay. Okay. Let's get into detail. Okay. When you have a containment vessel and you have technology in there that does IO, reads, what's in the water and all that. It's just like you want to sense the temperature of the water, that kind of stuff. Or when the water level's low, or if it's hot, or if it's cold, that kind of thing. So it's very sensor based. Okay. See where I'm going with this? If
Yeah.
you can sense that, you can sense and break down what is causing the water to be warmed up. Okay. Temperature and all that kind of stuff. You can also break down the molecules in the water. See, remember, everything is made out of molecules and stuff and atoms. So you can look at that. They use lasers to look at that to do the detection of I've etched something in memory in water. How do I read it? Well, you may have um superconducting transistors and technology that is using the water through the sensors that are in it. So remember I said there's sensors in the water that can sense it and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then they derive the data correlation from using those sensors to make it non-technical. That's how they do it. Okay. It's just like you in your swimming pool, when it's cold or when it's warm, your thermometer tells you that kind of same thing. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, brilliant. Love it. Wow. We've covered a lot today. This has been amazing. Thank you so much, Joe. I really appreciate you coming on and imparting all this knowledge about this new technology that is reshaping our lives now and reshaping, lives for
Yes.
our future generations.
Well, I really appreciate this and a lot of the stuff on my LinkedIn and things like that. Once we finish, the papers on the heavy water and the quantum and all that and the AI, and I'll send you a copy of it. In fact, I'll send you a couple of pieces that are draft of something I'm working on that's very focused on it. So you'll get an idea visually how it looks. Okay.
Please do. Thank you. Thanks so much. All the best, Joe. Speak to you soon.
Have a good one. Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you. You too, sir. Bye bye.